Welcome back to Old State Valuable Coins. In today's exciting video, we're exploring the top 4 most valuable and expensive Roosevelt dimes, including the fascinating 1965 issue, a year when the United States was making a historic transition from silver to clad coinage. Some of these tiny 10-cent coins look completely ordinary, but rare errors, unusual varieties, exceptional condition, and extraordinary minting mistakes can transform them into highly sought-after collectibles. So stay with us until the end, because you might be surprised by which Roosevelt dime takes the #1 spot. Let's get started. First up in the picture this. You reach into an old jar of coins and pull out a worn Roosevelt dime dated 1965. It is scratched, its surfaces carry years of toning, and there is no mint mark beneath the date. At first glance, it looks ordinary, and in one very important sense, it is. The 1965 Roosevelt dime was intentionally produced without a mint mark, so calling it a Denver no mint mark coin would be misleading. During 1965 through 1967, the United States Mint temporarily removed mint marks from circulating coins as part of its response to the severe nationwide coin shortage. But 1965 was far from an ordinary year in American coinage. The United States was moving through a period of enormous social, political, and economic change. The Vietnam War was escalating. President Lyndon B. Johnson was pursuing his Great Society programs. The Civil Rights Act had recently transformed federal law, and Americans were watching the country change at a remarkable pace. At the same time, rising demand for circulating coins, speculation in silver, and the increasing value of the metal contained in older coins created a serious shortage. The government responded with the Coinage Act of 1965, which fundamentally changed the composition of America's dime and quarter. The traditional 90% silver dime was replaced by a copper-nickel clad dime, while the half-dollar received a reduced silver composition before eventually becoming clad as well. The Roosevelt dime itself had been introduced in 1946, created to honor President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whose leadership during the Great Depression and World War II had made him one of the most consequential presidents in American history. Chief engraver John R. Sinek designed the coin, placing Roosevelt's portrait on the obverse and a torch between an olive branch and an oak branch on the reverse. The torch represented liberty, the olive branch peace, and the oak branch strength. Now here is where the story becomes fascinating. More than 1.65 billion regular 1965 Roosevelt dimes were produced for circulation, meaning the date itself is unquestionably common. A normal scratched and toned 1965 clad dime will generally not be a rare treasure simply because it has no mint mark. In circulated fine or very fine condition, ordinary examples typically remain close to face value, while attractive about uncirculated pieces may bring a modest premium, and certified mint state examples can be worth more depending on grade, strike, and eye appeal. But mintage is only the beginning of the investigation. A coin can have a gigantic mintage and still contain an extraordinarily scarce error, while a lower mintage date can remain plentiful because enormous numbers survived. For the 1965 Roosevelt dime, the truly exciting possibility is not the absence of a mint mark, but the possibility of an authentic production error, especially a transitional error created during the change from silver to clad coinage. That is the difference between an ordinary 10-cent coin and a potentially important numismatic discovery. To understand what could make a 1965 Roosevelt dime extraordinary, you have to look beyond the date and understand the manufacturing process. Coins begin as metal stock that is rolled to a precise thickness and punched into blanks, which are then prepared as planchets before being struck between dies under tremendous pressure. The dies themselves are manufactured through multiple stages, and errors can originate at different points in that process. Hub doubling, for example, occurs during die production and can create genuine double die characteristics that are transferred repeatedly onto coins struck from that die. Die cracks develop later as working dies experience repeated stress, while off-center strikes occur when a planchet is improperly positioned inside the striking chamber. A broad strike can happen when the collar does not properly contain the planchet, and a clipped planchet can result from the blanking process itself. Earlier United States coinage also frequently involved hand-punched mint marks, allowing repunched mint marks and misplaced mint mark varieties to develop, but that particular avenue should not be casually applied to a 1965 Roosevelt dime because the regular circulating coins of 1965 to 1967 intentionally carried no mint marks. Collectors should also be cautious with claims about large date, small date, overdate, or dramatic double die varieties unless the feature has been recognized and documented by authoritative variety references or a professional grading service. Machine doubling, die deterioration, scratches, gouges, and ordinary circulation damage can look surprisingly similar to genuine double die characteristics when viewed in photographs. The most important potential rarity for 1965 is the transitional silver planchet error. And now imagine the moment when such a coin reaches a major auction and specialists begin examining it under magnification, checking its weight and composition, comparing its design characteristics, and tracing its history. Suddenly, the scratches and toning are no longer the entire story. If the coin proves to be an authentic silver planchet transitional error, collectors are competing for something that represents a very specific moment in American monetary history. The instant when the old silver coinage system collided with the newly introduced clad system. This is where rarity, condition, provenance, certification, and collector demand come together. For a normal 1965 Roosevelt dime, realistic market values remain relatively modest. Worn fine and very fine examples are generally worth little beyond face value. About uncirculated pieces can bring premiums when attractive and original, and ordinary mint state examples can range from modest amounts upward depending on grade and quality. Exceptional certified pieces with superior preservation or desirable strike characteristics can command considerably more, but a high grade does not automatically make an ordinary 1965 dime rare. The market changes dramatically when a recognized major error is involved. Genuine 1965 silver planchet examples have brought prices ranging from the low thousands for less desirable or damaged specimens to more than $10,000 for exceptional certified pieces, with the documented $13,200 MS61 result providing a powerful benchmark for the upper end of the examples cited here. Registry set competition can push elite prices even further when collectors are trying to obtain the finest certified example available. But that competition is most intense for coins that are genuinely scarce and clearly distinguished by certification, grade, variety, or error attribution. A scratched and toned ordinary 1965 dime is therefore not comparable to a pristine or authenticated transitional error. Surface originality matters enormously. Natural toning that developed gradually over decades may be accepted as part of the coin's history, while harsh cleaning can leave hairlines and unnatural brightness that permanently affect desirability. Deep scratches can also prevent a coin from receiving a straight grade and may result in a details designation from a grading service. For that reason, professional grading and authentication can be especially important when a 1965 dime appears unusual. The central mystery is not, why does my dime have no mint mark? Because in 1965 that was normal. The real mystery is whether the coin contains something that should never have happened. An incorrect planchet, a genuine die variety, a dramatic striking error, or another documented mint-made anomaly. That distinction separates an ordinary pocket change coin from an important numismatic piece. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson hidden inside the 1965 Roosevelt dime. More than 1 billion examples could be struck, millions could survive, and most could remain worth little more than their denomination. Yet one unusual piece can escape the mint with a manufacturing mistake so rare that collectors compete intensely to own it. A 10-cent coin can therefore become a valuable historical artifact not because every example is rare, but because the mint occasionally produced something that was never supposed to exist. If your 1965 Roosevelt dime is scratched and toned, examine it carefully, but keep expectations realistic. The missing mint mark is normal, the date is common, and ordinary damage does not create rarity. The from silver to clad coinage in a form small enough to fit between 2 fingers, yet important enough to command thousands of dollars when rarity, authenticity, preservation, and collector demand all converge. Next up to in the imagine holding a 10-cent coin from 1976 that looks, at first glance, almost completely ordinary. A Roosevelt dime with some scratches, darkened areas of natural-looking toning, and the familiar absence of a mint mark. Millions of these coins were released into everyday American commerce, and most remain worth little more than their face value today. But this is where the story becomes fascinating, Because the 1976 Roosevelt dime belongs to a year unlike almost any other in modern American history. The United States was celebrating its bicentennial, marking 200 years since the Declaration of Independence, while the nation was simultaneously dealing with the economic aftershocks of recession and high inflation. Gerald Ford was president. America was emerging from the political trauma of Watergate and the Vietnam era, and the country was using its 200th birthday as an opportunity for national celebration and renewal. Against that dramatic backdrop, the Philadelphia Mint struck 568,760,000 Roosevelt dimes without a mint mark, while Denver produced another 695,222,774 with the D mint mark. That enormous production figure immediately tells us something important. A normal 1976 no mint mark dime is not automatically rare simply because it is old. In fact, the opposite is true. It was produced in extraordinary numbers. The Roosevelt dime series itself began in 1946, honoring President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and its design was created by chief engraver John R. Sinek. On the obverse, Roosevelt faces left, with the inscriptions Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, and the date surrounding his portrait, while Sinek's initials JS appear near the bottom of the portrait. The reverse presents a torch surrounded by an olive branch and an oak branch, with United States of America, E pluribus unum, and one dime completing the design. By 1976, however, the coin was no longer silver. It consisted of a copper-nickel outer layer over a pure copper center, weighing approximately 2.27 grams and measuring 17.9 millimeters across. And that is precisely why collectors must look beyond the date and face value. A huge mintage does not mean that every surviving example is equally common in every condition. Tens or hundreds of millions may have been struck, but circulation destroyed the surfaces of countless pieces through contact with other coins, vending machines, cash registers, pockets, and decades of ordinary handling. At the same time, some pieces escaped heavy circulation and survived with unusually sharp strikes, clean fields, attractive original surfaces, and exceptionally complete details in the torch bands. Those high-grade survivors can become dramatically more desirable than an ordinary circulated example. PCGS records an auction result of $1,560 for a 1976 D. Roosevelt dime graded MS-67 full bands, demonstrating how a common-date modern dime can become a four-figure collectible when condition and strike quality reach an exceptional level. But for the specific 1976 no-mint mark coin described here, scratches and toning are crucial. Scratches normally reduce desirability, especially if they are deep or obvious, while attractive, undisturbed natural toning can sometimes add character rather than hurt value. Artificial coloring, harsh cleaning, polishing, or chemical treatment can have the opposite effect. So the real mystery is not simply, is this 1976 dime rare? The better question is, what exactly is different about this particular piece? And now we reach the most exciting part of the hunt. What could make one 1976 Roosevelt dime dramatically more valuable than hundreds of millions of ordinary examples? The answer is the combination of rarity, condition, originality, visibility, and collector competition. A normal 1976 Philadelphia dime in circulated condition is common, and current guide information shows values generally remaining very modest through the lower grades, with substantial increases reserved for unusually high certified grades. NGC's published guide, for example, lists the ordinary 1976 Philadelphia dime at roughly face value in circulated grades and progressively higher amounts in top uncirculated grades, reaching much higher territory at the finest levels. But an important, independently verified error could completely change that equation. Imagine a coin with a dramatic off-center strike that clearly leaves the date visible, or a rare and authenticated double die variety with unmistakable doubling, or an unusual minting mistake that specialists can trace back to the production process. Suddenly, the coin is no longer competing against hundreds of millions of normal 1976 dimes. It is competing against a much smaller population of documented error coins. That is where auction prices can become surprising. The strongest prices generally go to pieces that are not merely unusual, but are clearly identifiable, authenticated, visually dramatic, and desirable to specialists. Registry set competition can add another layer because advanced collectors compete for the finest certified examples of specific dates and varieties. A collector who already owns a high-grade 1976 Roosevelt dime may be willing to pay considerably more for an example that improves the quality ranking of an important set, particularly when the population of coins at that grade is extremely small. This is one reason a coin that might appear nearly identical to another dime can sell for radically different prices. The difference can be a single grade point, a full band's designation, cleaner original surfaces, sharper strike detail, or a rare documented variety. For the coin described here, 1976, no mint mark, scratched and toned. The realistic conclusion is much more grounded than the sensational headlines often found online. If it is simply a normal circulated Philadelphia dime with scratches and ordinary toning, it is generally a common collectible rather than an ultra-rare fortune. Fine and VF examples are typically worth little more than face value. AU examples may bring a modest premium, and ordinary mint state examples can range from a few dollars upward, depending heavily on grade and market demand. The extraordinary prices belong to exceptional certified specimens, and the documented auction history proves that top-grade survivors can sometimes reach hundreds or even more than $1,000. But those results are tied to specific grades and attributes, not to every coin carrying the same date. So if you have one of these dimes in your collection, don't clean it, don't polish it, and don't scratch at the toning to make the design brighter. Instead, examine the date, the lettering, the rim, the edge, the torch bands, and both sides under good lighting. Compare any suspected doubling with documented examples. Weigh the coin if you suspect an unusual composition, and seek professional attribution before assuming you have discovered a major error. The most valuable lesson of the 1976 Roosevelt dime is that rarity is not created by age alone. A coin can be nearly 50 years old and still be extremely common, while another coin struck during the exact same year can become highly desirable because of a rare error, exceptional preservation, extraordinary strike, or documented provenance. And that is what makes coin collecting so compelling. Sometimes the difference between an ordinary 10-cent piece and a four-figure collectible is hidden in a tiny detail that millions of people never noticed. The 1976 Roosevelt dime may have been born during America's bicentennial as an ordinary piece of pocket money, but under extraordinary circumstances, the right survivor can become a remarkable piece of United States numismatic history. And now we reach the most exciting part of the hunt. What could make one 1976 Roosevelt dime dramatically more valuable than hundreds of millions of ordinary examples? The answer is the combination of rarity, condition, originality, visibility, and collector competition. A normal 1976 Philadelphia dime in circulated condition is common, and current guide information shows values generally remaining very modest through the lower grades, with substantial increases reserved for unusually high certified grades. NGC's published guide, for example, lists the ordinary 1976 Philadelphia dime at roughly face value in circulated grades and progressively higher amounts in top uncirculated grades. Next up imagine finding a Roosevelt dime dated 1977 in an old collection, a cash drawer, or a forgotten box of coins, and noticing something unusual about it. At first glance, it may look like nothing more than an ordinary 10-cent piece, especially if the surface is scratched, toned, and shows the unmistakable evidence of years of circulation. But 1977 was a fascinating year in United States history, and this little coin was born during a period of economic uncertainty, political change, and everyday Americans dealing with inflation and the continuing effects of the energy crisis. Jimmy Carter had just become president. The country was still adjusting to the aftermath of the Vietnam era. Energy shortages remained a major concern, and the famous New York City blackout of July 1977 became one of the defining moments of a turbulent summer. Against that backdrop, the United States Mint produced enormous quantities of Roosevelt dimes for everyday commerce. The Roosevelt dime itself had been introduced in 1946 following the death of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and its design was created by John R. Sinek, whose portrait of Roosevelt appears on the obverse, facing left, with liberty above and "I in God we trust" beside the portrait. The reverse presents a torch surrounded by olive and oak branches, symbolizing liberty and peace, with United States of America and one dime completing the design. By 1977, these coins were no longer made from the silver composition used during the early Roosevelt dime years. Instead, the regular circulation dime consisted of a copper-nickel outer layer bonded to a pure copper center, weighing 2.27 grams and measuring 17.90 millimeters across. The 1977 Philadelphia issue, recognizable because it carries no mint mark, had an official mintage of 796,930,000 pieces, while the Denver issue carried AD and had a mintage of 376,607,228. That enormous production figure immediately tells us something important. A normal 1977 no-mint mark Roosevelt dime is not an ultra-rare coin simply because it is old. In fact, millions upon millions survived, and ordinary circulated examples generally remain close to face value. This is where the real treasure hunt begins, because mintage and rarity are not the same thing. What collectors pursue is not merely an old date, but a coin with an unusual combination of scarcity, preservation, striking quality, and documented desirability. A scratched and heavily circulated 1977 dime normally has little premium, and natural toning alone does not transform it into a rarity. But imagine that beneath those ordinary-looking surfaces is a genuine mint-made error, an unmistakable off-center strike, a missing portion of the clad layer, a dramatic die break, or another authenticated production mistake. That changes the conversation completely. Errors occur because coin production is an industrial process involving planchets, dies, hubs, presses, alignment, and enormous quantities of metal blanks moving through the mint. A doubled die can originate much earlier, during the creation of the working die, when a hub makes more than one impression in slightly different positions, leaving genuine doubled design elements on every coin struck from that die. That is fundamentally different from ordinary machine doubling, which can produce flat, shelf-like secondary impressions, but usually has far less collector significance. Off-center errors can happen when a planchet is improperly positioned beneath the dies, while clipped planchets, die cracks, die chips, struck through errors, and missing clad layer errors arise from different failures in the manufacturing process. However, collectors should be especially careful with claims involving a 1977 large date, small date, overdate, or repunched mint mark. Those terms are famous in other United States coin series, but they should not automatically be applied to a 1977 Roosevelt dime. The 1977 Philadelphia dime's missing mint mark is completely normal because Philadelphia did not place a P mint mark on these circulation dimes. It is not equivalent to the famous missing S-proof Roosevelt dime errors. In other words, if someone claims that an ordinary 1977 no mint mark dime is automatically rare because the mint mark is missing, that claim should immediately be treated with skepticism. And now we reach the part that can make an ordinary 10-cent coin genuinely fascinating: condition, strike quality, and the possibility of an authenticated error. A circulated 1977 Philadelphia Roosevelt dime with scratches and ordinary toning is generally not where the spectacular money is found. In a rough circulated condition such as fine or very fine, a normal example may be worth around face value to perhaps a modest premium depending on eye appeal and the buyer. In about uncirculated condition, the value can still remain relatively modest, and even ordinary mint state examples usually need exceptional preservation before serious collector premiums begin to appear. Current market references show how dramatically grade can matter. Ordinary 1977 D examples can trade at relatively modest levels in lower mint state grades, while top-quality full bands pieces have reached much stronger prices. PCGS records an auction result of $1,020 for a 1977 DMS 67 full bands dime sold by Heritage in October 2020, while its auction database records $1,762.50 for an NGC MS 69 1977 D in a Stax Bowers sale in July 2013. Those numbers are important because they demonstrate what a truly elite example can accomplish without pretending that every 1977 dime is worth hundreds or thousands of dollars. There is also an extraordinary 1977 D obverse die cap example graded MS 69 that brought $1,725 at Heritage in 2006, showing how a dramatic mint-made error can create an entirely different market category. For the specific no-mint mark 1977 Philadelphia dime, the situation is even more important to understand. Its 796.93 million mintage makes the ordinary issue common, so a scratched and toned specimen should not be described as an ultra-rare fortune coin unless a legitimate variety or error has been identified and authenticated. A genuine dramatic off-center strike, a major missing clad layer error, an unusual die break, or another recognized mint error could command substantially more than a normal circulated dime, but the value would depend on the visibility of the error, percentage of off-center strike, preservation, rarity among known examples, certification, and actual auction demand. Surface condition matters enormously here. Natural toning can sometimes be attractive and completely original, while harsh cleaning can permanently reduce collector appeal by leaving hairlines, unnatural brightness, or damaged surfaces. Scratches are especially important because professional graders distinguish between normal contact marks and more serious surface damage, and a coin with significant scratches may receive a details designation rather than a straight numerical grade. Professional certification becomes particularly valuable when a coin is being presented as an unusual error because authentication can separate a genuine mint-made mistake from post-mint damage. Registry set competition can push prices higher when collectors compete for the finest certified examples of a particular date, mint, strike designation, or variety. But that competition only exists when the coin has the quality and certification to justify it. That is why a common 1977 dime can have two completely different stories. One ordinary coin might be worth roughly 10 cents to a small premium, while an exceptional certified full-band specimen or dramatic mint error can move into the hundreds or, in particularly strong cases, above $1,000 based on documented market results. And there is an important lesson hidden inside this little piece of copper and nickel. The greatest value does not come from simply being old, having a strange color, or lacking a mint mark. It comes from something demonstrably unusual that collectors can verify. The famous six-figure Roosevelt dime stories belong to extraordinary coins, such as the 1975 No-S proof, where only two examples are known and one sold for $506,250, not to ordinary 1977 Philadelphia circulation dimes. So if you are holding a scratched, toned 1977 Roosevelt dime with no mint mark, the realistic expectation is that it is a normal Philadelphia issue unless close examination reveals something genuinely unusual. Look carefully at the date, the lettering, the rims, the torch, the bands, the edges, and especially the possibility of a true mint-made error. But resist the temptation to turn every imperfection into a rarity. Because sometimes the most valuable discovery is not a guaranteed fortune at all, but the moment when a seemingly ordinary 10-cent coin reveals a legitimate story of the mint's machinery, human error, survival, and collector demand. And that is what makes Roosevelt dimes so compelling. Even when the coin in your hand is worth only a dime, the possibility of finding something truly exceptional keeps collectors searching, because somewhere among billions of ordinary coins, a tiny manufacturing mistake can create a piece of United States numismatic history that collectors are willing to compete fiercely to own. Next up to in the imagine finding a 1979 D. Roosevelt dime in an old box, a forgotten collection, or even a handful of ordinary change, and noticing that it looks nothing like the pristine coins usually shown in auction catalogs. The surface is scratched, the metal carries years of natural toning, and the coin has clearly lived a life. At first glance, a 1979 D dime seems like one of the most ordinary 10-cent pieces of the late 20th century, because the Denver Mint struck an enormous 390,921,184 examples that year. But that huge production figure is exactly where the real story begins, because mintage is not the same thing as rarity, and a common coin can become extraordinary when a particular die variety, dramatic minting error, or exceptional surviving example enters the picture. The 1979 D. Roosevelt dime was struck in Denver from the copper-nickel-clad composition introduced in 1965, weighing about 2.27 grams, measuring roughly 17.9 millimeters, and carrying the familiar reeded edge. Its obverse presents Franklin D. Roosevelt, with Liberty and I in God We Trust surrounding his portrait, while the reverse displays the torch flanked by an olive branch and an oak branch, symbols traditionally associated with liberty, peace, and strength. The design traces back to Chief Engraver John R. Sinnock, whose initials JS appear beneath Roosevelt's neck. The Roosevelt dime was first released in 1946 as a tribute to the president and his connection with the March of Dimes and the fight against polio. By 1979, America was living through a very different economic and political atmosphere. Jimmy Carter was president, inflation was a major concern, energy prices were rising, and the Iranian Revolution and resulting oil disruption were adding pressure to an already troubled economy. Against that turbulent backdrop, millions of these little dimes entered everyday commerce, passing through cash registers, pockets, vending machines, banks, and countless transactions. Most were spent, worn, scratched, bag-marked, or eventually forgotten, which explains why surviving examples in ordinary circulated grades are not inherently rare. A scratched and toned 1979 D-dime without a verified major variety would generally remain a modestly valued collectible rather than a spectacular rarity. The important distinction is that the coin's story changes if the scratches and toning are hiding something genuinely unusual. Collectors examine the date, the Denver D mint mark, the lettering, the devices, the rim, the strike, and especially the possibility of a recognized die variety or major minting error. Modern discussions sometimes attach terms such as large date, small date, double die, repunched mint mark, or overdate to almost any unusual-looking coin, but these labels should not automatically be applied to a 1979 D Roosevelt dime. The major PCGS listings for the 1979 D identify the normal issue and the full band's designation rather than presenting a famous large date/small date or overdate variety for this date and mint. That matters because true doubled dies and other varieties originate from specific manufacturing events. A double die effect can develop when a working die receives misaligned impressions during the hubbing process, while mint marks on this era's coins were applied to dies separately, creating the possibility of genuine repunched mint mark varieties when a punch was applied more than once in different positions. Die cracks can develop later as working dies experience stress and repeated striking, while off-center strikes occur when a planchet is improperly positioned during the striking operation. But none of these possibilities should be assumed merely because a coin has a strange mark, flattened letter, damaged mint mark, or irregular edge. A scratch caused after the coin left the mint is damage, not a mint error. Toning is not automatically evidence of rarity, and a weak strike is not automatically a doubled die. For a circulated 1979 D dime like the one described here, the realistic question is not, how much is every 1979 D dime worth? But rather, does this particular coin possess a documented feature that separates it from the hundreds of millions of normal examples? That is the dividing line between an ordinary old dime and a serious numismatic discovery. And now we reach the part that makes the 1979 D Roosevelt dime especially fascinating. Condition can dramatically reshape the market even when the date itself is common. A heavily circulated example in fine or very fine condition, especially one with scratches, would normally command only a small premium, while an about uncirculated coin with strong detail and minimal where may bring somewhat more, and certified mint state examples can become much more interesting as preservation improves. Current market listings for ordinary 1979 D examples show how modest the normal market can be compared with the spectacular headlines surrounding genuinely rare coins, while PCGS records a remarkable $1,495 auction result for a 1979 D-graded MS-64 by PCGS at Heritage Auctions on September 1, 2008. That result is important, but it should not be interpreted as a normal value for a scratched or toned 1979 D-dime. In fact, the existence of such a record demonstrates one of the strangest truths of coin collecting. The highest price may belong not to the oldest coin, not to the lowest mintage coin, and not necessarily to the coin with the most dramatic-looking damage, but to an unusually scarce combination of grade, strike quality, appeal, certification, and collector competition. The full band's designation is particularly significant for Roosevelt dimes because it evaluates the horizontal bands crossing the torch on the reverse. Sharply separated bands are difficult to preserve on many circulation strikes, and the finest examples can attract intense competition from specialists and registry set collectors. PCGS lists an $850 auction record for a 1979 D full bands example graded MS66FB, showing how much the market can differentiate between an ordinary example and a truly exceptional piece. Registry competition can push prices upward when collectors are trying to assemble the finest possible certified set, because an MS-66 FB or better coin may satisfy a narrow goal that an ordinary uncirculated dime cannot. Yet even that does not transform every 1979 D dime into a valuable coin. A scratched, circulated example would generally fall far below those elite auction levels, and cleaning could further reduce collector appeal because originality and surface quality are crucial to professional grading. Natural toning can be attractive when it is stable, original, and visually pleasing, but artificial-looking coloration or harsh cleaning can create problems. Scratches are particularly important because graders distinguish normal contact marks from damage severe enough to prevent a straight numerical grade. A professional grading service can authenticate the coin, evaluate its surfaces and strike, determine whether it qualifies for a numerical grade or a details designation, and when appropriate, attribute a recognized variety. For this reason, realistic value discussions should be thought of in broad condition-dependent terms rather than promises. A normal scratched 1979 D may remain near the low dollar range. A better circulated or problem-free example may bring a modest premium. Attractive mint state pieces can move into the higher single digits or tens of dollars depending on grade and market, and exceptional certified full bands examples can command substantially more. The famous $1,495 record demonstrates that four-figure territory is possible for a 1979 D under extraordinary circumstances, but it is not representative of a typical coin. Most importantly, there is no credible reason to claim that a normal 1979 D dime with scratches and ordinary toning is automatically worth thousands. The extraordinary value comes from documented rarity, not storytelling alone. And that is what makes this little coin such a compelling piece of numismatic history. It was born in an era when nearly 391 million identical-looking dimes were produced, yet decades of circulation, preservation, die quality, and collector attention can separate one surviving specimen from another. A dramatic off-center strike, a properly attributed doubled die, a genuine die break, or another authenticated minting anomaly could make an individual coin much more interesting, while a superb full bands example can become desirable because so few coins survive with the precise combination of strike and preservation demanded by advanced collectors. The journey from 10 cents to serious collectible value is therefore not magic. It is the result of rarity, condition, authenticity, documented characteristics, and competition among collectors. So if you hold a 1979 D Roosevelt dime with scratches and toning, don't assume the damage makes it worthless, but don't assume it makes the coin rare either. Look carefully, compare it with authenticated examples, and focus on evidence rather than internet hype. Because sometimes the most fascinating part of a 10-cent coin isn't the amount stamped on its face, but the extraordinary chain of manufacturing history, survival, preservation, and collector demand that can turn an ordinary piece of pocket change into a genuinely important numismatic artifact.